Hey Elaine, can you hear us? Let me think.
I can hear you.
I did a conference call myself on
Can you hear us, Elaine?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome.
She's not in the vortex any longer.
Okay, so we will get ahead and get started. So this is our March work session. We're here to talk about the climate action plan filed by the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board. We've got some guests. Introduce yourself to anyone who's watching.
I'm Amanda Mazzoni. I'm a principal planner at the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board. And I've been working with the Climate Action Plan Subcommittee since about August. So we have a draft ready to share. After tonight's meeting, we'll kind of meet again with the subcommittee and then release it to the public so that everyone can have a chance to give some more input before we have a final draft.
I'm Keith Ewald from Partnering with Judas, planner and landscape architect, working with my colleague Grace, who I believe is on here as well. We are working with the town's comprehensive plan steering committee on finalizing their first comprehensive plan, and really here this evening to continue the dialogue with Amanda and the climate action committee to integrate the two plans together through common policies and planning components.
Can you just get us right off?
Sure. Okay, so I had originally sent over the first preliminary draft, which I have since sent over a new draft. So I just wanted to quickly highlight the changes from the first draft. This is the changes were made based off of comments from the subcommittee. So I created the first draft based on our meetings previously. We had our first meeting to review the draft. They gave some good input and feedback. I've since taken it and created this new draft from the 2nd of March. And so I'll just highlight what the changes are so that you know kind of what the input has been from the subcommittee so far. And in case anybody hasn't had a chance to read the new version yet, because I just sent it over a few days ago, just to kind of highlight those changes. And then we can move on from there. So the first major change from the first draft is that I have added a definition section. That was something that the subcommittee felt would be really important for people who might be reading through that are less familiar with this type of subject matter. So I tried to pull out any kind of acronym or term that might just need a little bit of an additional explanation for people who are less familiar with this subject matter. So that's new. I also added a timeline graphic to kind of show the history of how this whole effort came to be. It wasn't just kind of out of the blue, let's make a climate action plan. So I started back at the formation of the Sustainable Manlius Committee, working through the Climate Smart Clean Energy Committee, Clean Energy Communities programs, and then, all the way up to what led us to the climate action plan. And so that actually wasn't something that the committee asked for specifically, but they did ask generally for me to add some additional like graphics, infographics and images that would make it a little bit more interesting than the original draft, the very first draft. But I just kind of thought this would be a good way to introduce the whole project to people reading through. So that's new. I have added language to the target reduction goals. So one of the main components of a climate action plan is putting in some kind of target reduction in terms of the emissions, the percentage of emissions reductions that you would like to see by a certain year. And so the committee we've had several discussions about what that target should be. And we revisited it at our last meeting, and they wanted me to add some additional language to explain that they would like the longer term goal to state that they would like the town to reach net zero emissions as soon as possible, but no later than 2050, instead of just saying by 2050. So that language has been added. And we can have a larger discussion about that. In fact, I would like to, once we get into the discussion part. I've also added some just generally more graphics and images from the town, and including alternative, alt text, for, folks who might be, visually impaired and having a reading software read this to them on their computers, so that each of the graphs and images, will have that alt text so that it'll explain what they're looking at. And then finally, the probably most important thing that I added is on page 25. It's a best actions graphic. So there's, we have this long list of emissions reduction actions for the town to consider. That will impact both municipal operations emissions and the community emissions. And we had a discussion with the committee about the importance of keeping this long list of actions, just to show that there's so much that the town could consider to help reach these goals in the plan. And that, they felt that a lot of these were important to keep in. But they wanted to kind of focus in on certain actions, so that it wasn't quite as overwhelming to people to just, look through all of the charts, and all of the tables. So these best actions are actually, they have not been run by the subcommittee yet. This is what I pulled out, based on several factors, including, emissions reduction potential and relationship to the town's major emitting sectors from the inventory. But also the priority rankings from the subcommittee and input that we received from the community survey, as well as approximate costs of implementation. So I kind of took all of those things into consideration when I was looking through and trying to pull out the top actions to consider. So these are definitely, can still be revised. It's just, based on my, all the input that I've had in the discussion we've had to date. It seemed like these seemed like they made sense as the ones to kind of pull out as the best actions to kind of focus in on first, and not necessarily have to implement first, but just as a discussion point, and again, a way to not be totally overwhelmed with this whole list of actions.
So Amanda, I would just like to say, as somebody who listened to that conversation, this is phenomenal.
Okay.
Um, To put it in a little graphic that gets it, because that conversation was all. over the place. So I am extremely impressed. And I think, the way that you thought of not just the scoring that people did, but what you know about the feasibility of some of these, is to just choose things that make sense. And, somebody may replace one or other of these, but I think the general, once they see this, they will definitely think this is good. So.
Well, it's part of the plan that we want the public to read. It's important that, rather than us who are probably like, okay, let me go grab a cup of coffee and I'll sit down for an hour and a half and read through this.
Right.
A regular person who would say, oh, I'll glance through it. This is gonna catch their eye and they're gonna walk away with actual information about, they're gonna feel informed rather than overwhelmed.
Right,
That's great.
right. That was the
So
discussion and what I was hoping to.
I am very impressed.
Good, well, I'm glad to hear that. And I was just thinking also, something that I thought of after I sent out this draft is that I can also take whatever the ultimate best actions are and kind of highlight them in the charts later too. To make it, again, just a little bit more visual and standing out to everyone. So those are the changes that have been made. So I would like to just start from kind of a general, high level opinions from the town board. I would like to, from this meeting, and with some, input from you all, what your thoughts are, because ultimately we will be asking the town board to adopt the document. So we want you all to be happy with the contents and, in terms of all of the details, but also just the general impression of it. So I would like to just start and ask for anybody to give your kind of overall impressions of the documents, is there anything missing that you would like to see in it, from a general standpoint, like any kind of section or, I don't know, more imagery or, graphic type information? What's your general impression, and is there anything you would like to see added, in the document? Yes.
I just want to, echo what everyone has said. Thank you, thank you. And also, yes, I think that when I looked at other plans, I always was curious about the people who were doing this and their backgrounds and interests and their stakes, really. We know the stakeholders, who are the stakes that of the people here. And so having everybody submit like one-line bios or something, and having a rubric for like your name, blah, 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 so that there's all of that, I think, and then the professional mini bios of the participants, I think would be great.
Okay, so in terms of like on the acknowledgements page.
On the
Kind of
acknowledgements page.
just
Mhm.
expand that to explain who everybody is a little bit further.
I think we should do it on the plan too. Yeah, we should make, actually, we're getting to the point where we should make that little grid and ask people to start filling it in. It would be good to have that for the community. Yeah, because it's almost like the and you could even have it positioned if you wanted to as a grid in some ways, because like where they reside, like professional interests, like recreational interests or something, something that makes them very human and shows the multiple perspectives that they're bringing to
Yeah.
this. And the stakes, yeah.
I was like, I feel like I was pretty involved in some of the conversations, but still a little on the outside, and I'm still not an expert in sustainability by any measures. But I think what I really like about this, especially with the definitions, is that this is very digestible. And when I think about talking to a resident and, I want to tell them, we got charging stations installed, or we're finally getting to the last of the light bulbs in the highway department. Sometimes it's hard to explain the why, the how, and I think this is such a great kind of entry point to, when I think about, being out there talking to residents at their doors to say, you can check this out. This is actually pretty light reading. And it does a really good job of showing how we've gotten here. And then it really sets it up so that it feels like if someone's reading for this for the first time and they don't know all the things we've been doing, I feel like it gets them all the relevant information they need. And then immediately, especially with that graphic, they know, oh, I know, okay, so I'm excited about this. And there's so often we'll bring somebody to the table, teach them, and then we're like, okay, so like wait for the email that comes in 4 to 6 months, whereas this is like immediately actionable stuff that they can also ask us to say, well, you've had the plan for 6 months, where are you at on it? So I thought as, a piece of information, the presentation of it is really, really strong. And I, even through the definitions, I was like, oh, that's what that means. Because, and probably words that I've used because we've had these conversations, but I really did think that it very succinctly kind of brings that point.
I have one more comment. Thank you for that, John. Agree. When people I remember when we were going through the process at the beginning, there are towns across the county are gonna be doing these eventually. And we're excited to be one of the first, acknowledging that where this is happening in the space of within the county, like what's happening, like, like a blurb on the bottom, like the town is one of the first, blah, blah, blah. So it's lodging us into the larger context. And also saying for other municipalities interested, we always welcome, please be in touch with us if you want to talk to us about experience, and here are 2 resources for you, something like that. But having that at the beginning, I think will also help other municipal leaders that are like me and don't know where to start. And want to feel like they understand where things are, because all of these documents are, at the state level too, they're lodged in this huge infrastructure, but we're smaller, we're a smaller situation to understand.
Yeah, sure.
Well, it's even too, like looking at the comprehensive plan and looking at some of the projects we've got coming, this is a great piece to be able to say, not only do we want it because people want it to be walkable, but it actually is very much aligned with what our goals are, which is, if not, people want to walk because it's convenient and maybe they want the exercise, but it also means so many of the other things we're trying to do. So it really, it's nice to kind of see everything tied up so that you really understand how everything kind of plays. And I think the graphics in here, especially too, I love the survey responses, where it's just like, how many people know about sustainable manliness? And it's just like, yeah, that's a really, it's something that maybe you're afraid of telling the truth about sometimes, but, despite all that, we have a really robust committee and a great plan come out of it. And, hopefully we'll have that survey done again in the future and it'll be reversed.
Yeah, great. I know that was something that the committee brought up too, just like, we gotta do better with our outreach about what we're doing, and obviously from the survey results,
But what a great tool to be able to do that. Because again, it's not watch this meeting, it's not, this is, and if you're interested, this is digestible. And I think especially too, when we think about how do we engage younger people in what municipal governments do, I feel like this is something that would be very attractive to say, yeah, we're talking about it on a global scale, on a national scale, but like, you can see right here what the problems are in your local government and how to actually affect that change.
Right.
That's great.
I think it should have a, like a welcome, and it should be more narrative, and like a welcome. And maybe that information that I was just suggesting about placing in context is in the welcome note instead,
okay.
but making it a little bit, conversational to open it up. So you've got the two styles, like this is an official document, okay, hey, welcome, we know you're a human being reading this.
Yeah, and we have done that, specifically a welcome, like from the supervisor
Mhm.
or mayor, so that might be a good thing to consider if you're willing.
Yeah, that's a really good beginning. And I think that could also include some context around the state laws about environmental sustainability. Putting it in the broader context.
Yep, and so there is a whole section about the state's climate law.
Mhm.
So but if you wanted to, have that more conversational welcome, that includes that as well from the supervisors.
So
perspective,
it's
maybe
kind of,
that could help.
it's not just we're off on our own, we're part of a bigger system.
Yeah, no.
Before I say anything that might appear nitpicky, I just want to say I think it's an absolutely fantastic document. I am 100% on climate.
But you found a
plan.
typo.
And I echo the Venn diagram thing is fantastic. That got in me as well. As someone who was not in this field. But what I wanted to point out is that in the executive summary, there isn't a reference to, attention to sustainable economic development in this executive intro, but it is referenced in the conclusion, that the process provided a chance to gather information on sustainable community and economic development projects. And just wondering if maybe that should be stated in the executive introduction as well. Will result in energy savings and advanced community goals for public health and safety, as well as sustainable development. And then my other just point of interest here is on page 13. I leapt from my chair and cheered as I read the final paragraph. In addition, the town of Van Nuys recognizes the importance of incorporating fairness and affordability considerations into climate change mitigation efforts. That is my favorite part of this document. What I would like is to, just some reference to how, any kind of collaboration.
Sure.
Maybe even put that in here too, is that's part of the aspiration of the plan is to continue, we know what the town can do to reduce our emissions. It's pretty much cut and dry. We know it's a budgetary constraint that'll take some time. We have a lot of good information for what residents can do and how the community can do it. But to then say, as this plan evolves and, eventually gets updated, hopefully with be a net zero before 2050, but to kind of put in there that as we go through this process, part of town and the community's responsibility is to figure out how to do all these things while bringing everybody along. So like if it's finding, a program through the county where you can get solar panels, making sure we're advocating for that program to be equitable to everybody and not just, the folks who can maybe lay out the cash ahead.
Elaine, do you want to say anything?
Hi. No, I really enjoyed the timeline and the graphics added. They're great. And definitely easier to digest. I really like the tables at the end as well. And then my only comment would be just to make sure that it's like printable. so that it's really easy to print. I know that chart's gonna be difficult, but you don't want it to get too small. But other than that, I'm really excited about it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, the printability thing is a little challenging, because, we wanted to be able to keep the chart readable, like you said, so that's why I made it on the 11 by 17, so, if you have access to that kind of printer, it's not difficult to print. But,
And maybe what we could do too is we could find a way to get this chart onto the website.
Oh, yeah.
But then make sure we have a copy of the plan that doesn't include this, so that, and you can have a link in the PDF to say, if you want to see everything, it's here.
yeah, I mean, and certainly I think the idea is that we would ultimately print some final copy that would have it in this format for anybody who wants a hard copy.
Have a couple-
And then, yeah, and then have it also virtually available so that, it's easy to read it's easy to read as we're flipping through it online, as a PDF. But if they wanted to print it at home, that's one thing where I might feel.
Yeah.
I think that would be, if we put for details on the plan actions or something, click here.
Yeah.
So for the person printing at home, it prints right for them at home, it just doesn't have this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just having another copy of it.
Great.
I figured out just fine on being in a.
Yeah. Okay, okay.
Okay, great.
But I think too, making sure it's a part of the website will be really good.
Well, it will definitely do that.
Okay.
Do you have any questions for us or issues that you think were controversial that you?
Well, so I do have some other questions for you all, but thank you for those just initial, thoughts, more kind of general reactions. I did want to get a feel from the, town board on your opinions of the target emission reduction goals set by the committee. There was some lengthy discussions, about that. But ultimately what the committee decided, was to go with a reduction goal that was in the spirit of the state's goal, based on like law, and really it's law, the state's law from the Climate Act. So that's why we have that kind of section, starting on page 10 about, it's the purpose of the climate action plan, and then it explains the state law, what's included in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And then there's just a brief narrative description of what the target reduction goal is, as well as a chart on page 24, which more kind of visually shows what the emission reduction targets are. But basically what the committee decided was that we would, consistent with the state, have a short-term goal of 2030 and a long-term goal of 2050. And have the goal be a 40% reduction by 2030 and a net zero reduction by 2050. So technically, the state's reduction in the law is an 85% emissions reduction, but they have a goal of a net zero emissions by 2050. It's just the law is only 85%, but really their target is net zero. So they left it at that because they want to leave that 15% open for carbon sequestration or new technology kind of stuff. So basically the committee had some discussions about being more aggressive than the state, less aggressive, or consistent, and they landed on, it's not completely apples to apples because the state reductions are based on a 1990 baseline level and the towns is based on a 2019 level. But they wanted to kind of go with the spirit of the state's reduction targets and stick with the 40% by 2030 and net zero as soon as possible, but no later than 2050.
So the 2019 level, is that from the study that you did earlier?
Yes, so that's
real data.
Yeah, that's real data from the greenhouse gas inventory that we put together, yeah.
And what would constitute 366 MTCOs?
So the page before, I mean, I remember this conversation, it was basically like, stop using so much gas. Like that was basically the brunt of it.
Yeah, so the majority of the town's emissions, both from a municipal operation standpoint and a community-wide standpoint, is from transportation. So, yeah, that's, we did, really focus on
Mhm.
the section of emissions reduction with that, the largest number of actions was land use and transportation.
Because that's
you
where
know,
you get the
because that's-
best.
Because that's where the town, you know, in terms of greenhouse gases, needs to focus on if you want to reach some of these goals. So. How do you all feel
I just
about,
wanted,
oh, sure, go ahead.
so 366 MTCOs tubes would be how many miles, how many gallons, like how can that person understand this?
Yeah, so I put that little blurb at the bottom of the page 24 under the target reduction, just kind of showing one example of installing a small solar array. So for example, if you installed solar at 10 homes, it would be about 8.7 metric tons of reduction. So,
I have a note on that, very
yes.
graphic. My question was, oh, in what time scale? What?
Oh, so that's per year. Yes,
So you might
I
wanna-
can
yeah,
add
that-
that, yep. I was trying to have that, you know, that was something that Caitlin brought up, is like, well, what does that actually mean? And so I was trying to figure out some way to provide an example. Because, you know, with the reduction strategies, it's really hard to estimate, you know, reductions from like switching to heat pumps. That was one thing Caitlin was saying, well, how many heat pumps is that? And it's like, well, really depends on your home, what you're starting with and what fuel you're using and what else, the size of your home. So that one was a little bit too many variables in it to measure it that
So-
way. So I kind of went with solar because it's like, solar's always gonna produce about the same amount, you know, if you have the solar ability at your home.
But 1,000 gallons, that.
But then, so if you just do the math, it's basically 42,000 gallons of gas. To meet the 2030 goals.
So it is a lot, and that was a conversation that the committee had too, was like, even as the state's, you know, goals, the percentage, 40% by 2030 is pretty aggressive, especially for the community side. Where you can't really go tell people you have to put in a heat pump or switch to your vehicle. But because that is the state's law, that's what the committee ultimately decided on. And there was also conversations of, should we go with a higher, you know, more aggressive reduction? And some people felt like they wanted to, but then other people were like, well, it's, you know, we don't want to be too aggressive that it's not realistic. And so they kind of felt like, because the state has this target as a law, that they should stick with what the state is doing. So, but I'm curious to hear what you all think about that. Is that, you know, are you comfortable going with these percentages being kind of, you know, not exactly apples to apples consistent with the state because your baseline is different, but consistent with their percentage reductions at least. And what do you think about the net zero by 2050?
We got the goals. Yeah, and I think we've already had a couple of years to look at systemic changes and what it really takes to put them in place, like the community solar project on the landfill. We know what it takes to do that, and it will have a great impact when it happens, but because of the legal challenges, you know, in the years that we've spent sort of doing it, I think that we can be really as aggressive as we want to be, but we also have to take into account what the catching up and what the other systems are doing to catch up. So I think being aggressive and yet allowing for the real time moves that have to be made by the other partners is reflected well in the existing, staying on track with this state's goal. I think that it also means we have to have a general orientation around big moving the needle projects in each of our budgets. And so I think if we're committed as a town board to do that, like we know that we're really, you know, and big moves, like we know 5 big key things will help move us forward, like stretch code, like working with our own fleet, including the police department for electric. I mean, we can think of those big key actions, the tree inventory, and also maintaining the carbon sequestration opportunities we have. All those things are really make it, in my mind, make it doable on the time scale that's in here.
My only comment is I think the 40% by 2030, based on the 2019 levels, I think that, like, understanding that, like, we're lucky enough that we're talking about a grant from Senator Mannion's office for our first EV in the entire fleet. We're still struggling to get a hold of EVs for our planning and development department. I do think 30 is quick, I would probably feel more comfortable with 35. Because that to me feels like a more realistic goal. To say, realistically, that's half of our fleet, half of our transportation emissions would have to go electric. And even then, it's really not gonna meet those goals. So,
But that's assuming also that the industry is sort of where it is now, and it's gonna change so much in the next couple of years, that I think that the ground underneath us shifts.
from the municipal side, that's really, like the community, I think that there's more momentum there.
Yeah,
Whereas as a municipality and, understanding that we have, it's great when a resident can switch to an EV or get an EV bike or put solar on. But we have so few opportunities with, like transitioning our police department to EVs.
Right.
Like, we don't have, like,
You
the
don't really
market
have
is,
control over that.
yeah, the market is great and, I have no doubt that we will see. I mean, we're already seeing a ton of EVs in the town of Manlius.
right, our EV ecosystem is like growing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? Especially with, we'll have one of the only maybe dealerships.
Yeah.
In the area, like, I think all signs point to us being if anyone's gonna do it in this area, it's gonna be us. Like, I don't see anyone else making the aggressive goal, but I think we should actually do a quick comparison of the 40 to 30 and like, just do a quick comparison and look at those stakes to make sure we're not over committing. And putting, future budgets in an unfunded mandate situation.
I'm also curious to see what the tax burden is gonna be on our residents for this, as from based on the municipality side of it, what we're doing with our vehicles. And then also for the taxpayer, what we're mandating that they're gonna end up having to do on their side, out of their pocket. And what are these affordability options that you're speaking of, and how it's going to help them, because this is a very heavy lift that we're essentially going to be forcing on our residents.
I totally disagree with that in terms of the forcing, because I feel like the entire project was created in an effort to respond to the opportunities that are being provided, the incentives being provided by the state. I don't think we should have unfunded mandates in the climate.
Yeah, and I just wanted to respond to that was something the committee felt very strongly about not including mandates for the residents. So, there's nothing in here that says the town will mandate residents switch to electric vehicles or install heat pumps or stop
The
using.
tax burden part of it, if we're switching if we're saying our fleets are all gonna be electric vehicles, that's gonna come with a tax cost.
Definitely there are costs, for the municipal, side of things. So, the good news is, in terms of, I'm just thinking of the police fleet vehicles, like I know there's in 2024 going to be a Chevy Blazer that
Yep.
comes out that's rated for police pursuit, and those are, it's supposed to be coming out at a very reasonable price. I don't know exactly, but it seems to be from what I've heard so far, should be comparable to just a traditional police fleet vehicle. So that's kind of the good news is that, it would be kind of when you'd be replacing vehicles anyway. You would just kind of replace them with an electric vehicle or plug-in hybrid, that, hopefully is at about the same cost as what your normal vehicle would have been. And there's more and more of those vehicles coming out that are cost comparable. And so it wouldn't be any additional tax burden.
But
on
I think
residents.
that is gonna impact the timeframe, because
Yeah.
if and this, with the police vehicles, maybe 7 years, you would cycle through with the highway nowhere.
You're right.
So
Yeah.
we'd be looking 20 years before we replace that.
Sure, yeah, and the highway too, I mean, it's
And they're
gonna
not ready.
depend
They
on
don't
the
even have
technology
first one.
anyway, so.
So I think the highway will absolutely not meet the 2030 goal.
Yeah, and
There's other things we're looking at, but we won't
Right, and I mean, the other thing is, 40% by 2030, just kind of, yeah, so there's that piece of the pie for the vehicle fleet, that's just not gonna work, yeah, you're right. So, yeah, I mean, if you feel,
We can change out light bulbs in the world. it's not-
yeah, yeah,
Number of vehicles that are. Like, for the town.
I mean, if I had to guess, I would say that out of our transportation, police is probably 40%. Because those are at least using gas, whereas the highway is diesel
Yeah.
and much bigger vehicles that are,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So I think really the 2030, if we went with 40%, the emissions goal is electrify the police.
please, please.
Yeah,
You know,
and we-
How many vehicles is that?
oh, at least,
I don't know.
at least maybe
30, I think it's
Yeah,
20,
there's a lot.
it's a lot.
In a competitive environment,
Right.
we're gonna be aiming to try and get that in.
We
That's-
never had pilot money before until solar projects came around. I think orienting ourselves to know we have to start with how do we readjust money that is not just thinking having a deficit mentality around this and a scarcity mindset around it, but like, what does this create? Yes, what pressures does it put on other parts of what we do? But we don't have maintenance in the case, the same kind of maintenance for electric vehicles that we have now. That does have implications for the way we staff, the whole 9 yards. It does require a lot of intense planning.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that in the short term, I mean, buildings and facilities are 14%. And there's real gains that could be had with the new facility with updates to the highway garage.
1000%.
And that's where I think it's the question of, do you say 2030 or 2035 in my mind, or
Or
30% or 40%,
Right, exactly.
however you want to frame that.
30 and just drop the level percentage.
But even then, I think having some more language, like even if we don't adjust it, or if we do, having some language in there that, under emissions reduction target, saying that, this is based on where we're sitting right now, whereas if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, we would not be talking about electrifying the police fleet,
Right,
and
the changes that are happening.
by the time we're really looking at this goal and looking at the 2050 goal, we might be talking about, being able to install carbon capture on a municipal building. We don't know, we really don't know. But that's where I think the goal is very realistic at 30% by 30 or 40% by 35, however you want to slice that. Because we have very real, by saying it's the police, it's getting our buildings as efficient as possible. And then also too, remembering that it's net zero, it's not just necessarily reduction, maybe with the new building, we can actually generate more power and then, actually do more offsets.
Yeah, putting solar on the highway buildings.
And geothermal.
And
Yeah.
geothermal, here you go.
But there might be, I think that's where, when I think, Alyssa, you bring up a really good point about budgetary constraints and taxpayer costs. But so much of this is gonna be, again, does the technology get to a point where it doesn't increase costs? Or do we at least realize savings in other ways? And I think having it in there that, basically saying, from the municipal side, so much of that is, what is the town willing to pay for? And also, is the technology keeping the pace that we feel like it is?
Right.
And is the supply chain there too?
Spread out over more time. It's a little bit better, giving us that shorter time frame. It's like, okay, it's a lot more expensive to try to do this, it's gonna be more.
If you're the first one, everything's gonna be more expensive.
Yeah.
So
Right,
That's
but so 2035 or 2040.
Or 30%, whatever it is.
We're playing around with the numbers a little bit more, but
So if
if
the
it's
state-
2030, 40%, it's like, feel like a chokehold.
Sorry. Yeah, so if the state, guideline was 2030, let's suggest to the climate action committee that it would be 30% by 2030, so we stick with those steps.
Yeah.
And then, but still the net zero by the end, because by then technology will have moved. And-
Just like for backloading the.
Yeah, because I think because we know that the highway fleet is really where the big, on the municipal side, where the big issue is.
Yeah.
And that technology is probably gonna launch at 2030, and then we can
Yeah.
do a.
Yeah,
sample
and you've got the school districts doing the buses,
Mhm.
and so
But that's gonna be slow too.
Yeah.
So just as you replace, it's
Yeah.
gonna take a long time,
it's gonna take us some
And
time,
they
so.
release buses every year.
but only a few.
Right.
And I think that's where in here, under emissions reduction target, I think if we add that extra information of basically taking this conversation and putting it into a few
Yeah.
sentences, maybe a couple paragraphs, to say, this was, these goals are set with, a snapshot of 2023 technology, understanding budgetary constraints, and also understanding that right now, the only reasonable path is electrifying the police fleet, maybe picking up a few of the like summer work vehicles at the highway department. But we have a clear vision of how we get there right now. And just, I think putting that in there to make it clear that, we've set these goals, but we have a plan right now, and it could change, like we might find out that, there is a real rare earth shortage, and you're not gonna be able to keep making these vehicles, or there's a new thing discovered that we can go quicker, and I think having that snapshot in here, because that's gonna make, in my mind, this a more valuable tool to pick up in 5 years.
Yeah, sure, yeah, and I should also just say, the idea with the goals is that once we get to the 2030 timeframe, we would kind of revisit this, reevaluate, and then adjust the long-term, the 2050 goal, accordingly. And, none of these goals, I should also say, none of these goals, if adopted, are binding. You don't have to implement, you don't have to get to these levels, you don't have to implement these actions. It's just meant to be a guide and targets. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Down the line, though, it could end up with taxes and fines for down the line for municipalities that never took any steps and are creating the carbon that everyone else is trying to mitigate, we're gonna get to a carbon tax kind of environment.
But I think it's to talk about 2050, like, who knows, part of infrastructure might be capturing carbon from the, like, that might be part of our responsibility. Just like it is making sure we have clear roads to drive on, who knows?
That would be cool.
We also want this to be something that's attainable and not something we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Well, it felt more comfortable to do the comprehensive plan thinking of a 10-year arc. So I think one of the things that, like, I'm being kind of triggered now, this idea of like this long arc is a little intense, like to think about, and this responsibility to be as ambitious as possible, because honestly, municipalities and government tends to be a little bit like have they don't go for the moonshot, right? We're not, and I don't want us to be sluggish when we have all the signs aligned and the political will to be less sluggish. That's all. So I just want to comment that
Oh,
Yeah.
I do have one, but Grace is on involved.
Okay, yeah, that was gonna be the next thing, is just kind of explain that we're planning, we've had some conversations, we're planning to, we've been coordinating on how we're going to continue to link the climate action plan with the comprehensive plan. I know Jamie at the office is planning to make a graphic, like how do you describe it?
Yeah, we kind of went over a little bit last night, but, Jamie and Grace and I are putting together basically something that's similar to the implementation matrix that you see here that Amanda passed out, but it's, what we call a crosswalk, which is, you can envision something like that, where it's a comprehensive plan, recommendations down the left, and then we've got sort of the climate action plan and climate smart communities, policies across the top, and then how we kind of, we kind of crosswalk those and where they both align. So as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of recommendations coming out of the comp plan that directly align and correlate to the climate action plan, climate smart communities, policies. So it's just another one of these type of matrix where we can, it'll be easy for anybody picking up either plan to look at that and be like, all right, how can we kind of,
Should we have
kill two birds with one stone?
A Venn diagram for the crowd.
Yeah, and so, we have each other's drafts right now for the comp plan and climate action plan. I'm gonna be taking next, I don't know, like next couple days, early next week to read through the draft comprehensive plan a little bit more carefully and kind of pull out any other specific details from that might fit within the climate action plan. I did go to the open house for the comp plan in the fall and to one of the meetings, and so I did incorporate some of that information that I heard from those meetings and from the open house information into the climate action plan and some of the recommendations. So, we have kind of been including that overlapping information, and we'll be having a little bit of a more obvious,
Yeah,
graphic that will show how they're coordinated.
and our first crack at it will be in the draft that goes back to the committee for review for those policies.
So timelines, that would be, in a couple weeks,
Yeah.
that version will be available. So anybody that is following this can read the other one and then see how they kind of go together. And we will be having, an open house for the comprehensive plan on the 28th. So people that are interested, they have that opportunity.
Well, it's, I mean, it just seems like, you know, however you're coming at this, because you want to be able to walk around, because you have kids, or because you have sustainability goals, like the fact that we're bringing everything together, I think is, it's, you know, however. Potential or not, for somebody, well, yeah.
It was intentional. Because we were at the beginning of the process, we knew we couldn't do a comprehensive plan without having a sustainability focus in some
Right.
way. So, but we also knew that there was this real process that New York State sort of recommends, and there's a bit of a playbook for comp plans. So I really hope that we end up with documents that are helpful to other municipalities who are having to do it.
In the process that, you went through to put them both together.
Yeah.
Side things.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, so much of this is just, you know, whether it's a resident saying, hey, you put a plan together, stick to the plan, or it's, well, why are you doing these things? Well, because we have a plan. However, it's, you know, it's graces on.
Thank you. Take care. We all actually applied for the grant too, to actually make sure we could do this. So
Yeah.
it wasn't just like everyone's feeling great about it, is that support it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, great. Okay, so we got about 10 minutes. I'm just gonna quickly talk about, the next steps and public outreach, and then whatever time we have left, I'll go with the last one, but, so just so everyone's aware that, you know, I'll take your feedback here tonight and make some revisions. And then I'll be sending out a revised draft to the subcommittee next week. We have our next meeting, possibly last or second last meeting at, on the 30th. So after that meeting, I'll be able to kind of tie things up, and we'll have our final draft, and that final draft that will be released to the public at that point. Hoping to kind of do some outreach on that to get folks aware that we have this, we like some feedback, and I am thinking about setting up like a Google form with some questions about their, you know, how they're feeling about the draft, and any feedback from them at that point. We're also going to be at, the Earth Fest event, we have a table, so I'm thinking of having some kind of maybe some large poster size things, maybe of this best actions kind of information and a target reduction kind of information. I'll talk that through with the committee hopefully. And then possibly having either that same last week in April, maybe have an open house or some kind of public meeting at that point to get some more input from the community on the draft. And then once we have a final draft, we'll come back to the town board, do a formal presentation, and ask for your vote at that point. So hopefully that will be, I don't know if it'll be the first meeting in May or the second meeting in May, but I'm hoping it will be. Assuming things go to plan, will be some point in May. So, so that's the estimated timeline. With the last of the time we have tonight, I would appreciate any thoughts or specific ideas or recommendations or details for any of the actions on the tables at the end. So specifically, you know, I was just thinking it would be great to add any more local information that we could. So for example, the first one I want to ask about is the implement strategies that support biking and walking or create a bike share program.
What page?
Page 27. And there's a little comment to the right. So we asked, do we include specific locations here? One of the most popular or common write-in answer from the community survey was about sidewalks and biking infrastructure. So, you know, we talked, I've heard some conversations Enders Road is one that has been brought up as a strategic location to consider. This plan is really focused on the town outside of the villages. So if there's any other town-specific areas, that should be included here.
Well, something to consider too is maybe having it refer to the program that Elaine is putting together, rather than, because that was the whole idea is, it's easy for us to say there should be a sidewalk here, but to get there, there's so much extra work.
Yeah,
And to just say leveraging the sidewalk program that's, coming out in 2023.
Yeah, we're in partnership with the village to look at a sidewalk project, and there's a grant for a sidewalk project on North Burdick Street already.
Yep.
We can say places we've identified, but we are prioritizing through the sidewalk program. Have you seen Elaine's work on it yet or heard about it?
I've heard about it.
Yeah, Elaine has she has a program, she has a potential way to describe how people get involved, and she shows the Tennessee and Michigan, refers to Tennessee and Michigan programs that are working in the
Yeah.
same manner. So I don't need to speak for you, Elaine.
I think she
Okay,
jumped on
so-
it.
So, yeah.
But I think
reach
it's
out
sort of
to
like-
her and-
So
and
we're
get
fine with
some,
that would be
But I
fine.
think
yeah.
so I think your question is well placed. Instead of mentioning a particular road, I would just reference. that.
Just reference.
Maybe it's the sidewalk program and
Boop, 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 boop.
and other opportunities such as North Birch.
Because we don't wanna prejudice actually a project that people are trying to get their neighbors to talk about by.
Yeah, that would feel unfair to say, okay, community members, go talk to the community members, but also it's in the plan that they don't have a choice.
Yeah, and I also think we should do something to recognize and incentivize the community members that join, like, we almost have a thermometer that goes down in terms of our community load for carbon reduction. So if we have something visual that's like every year at Earth Fest or whatever, the new people who got geothermal in their home, bought their EV, did something, biked more to work, whatever, and they made some sort of community commitment.
Almost like making the where we tell all the different organizations what actions we took, almost having one for the community. To say, hey, I earned us 2 points by installing a heat pump.
Exactly, personalizing their contribution in those gallons, that saved or whatever, so that people
Yeah, I bought an EV.
feel a stake in it, and that might be a sustainable manliness
Yeah.
action.
That's,
But I think building in something that's, how do we involve the community going forward in their particular responsibility to reduce this number?
Yeah.
By celebrating them, and by thanking them and recognizing what they're doing that they made possible in their life.
Yeah, that would be a really cool idea to have like set up on the website. It's just like, click if you bought an EV, or, put in a heat pump. or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
And collective groups too, like a whole building that, and thinking about inclusion too, and not making it all about people who drive cars and
Right.
people, but the community.
but that's a good thing to tie to an informational page of, get your home inspector for a heat pump, go to one of these events to test drive an EV, or even like if there's county programs like Pace for the
Yeah.
commercial buildings and stuff like that. Like, I feel like if you have, here are the incentives we want you to use.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, when you do it, click on this button to, tell us that you did it.
Yeah.
I think putting those together makes a lot of sense.
And Sustainable Manliness has the ability to get sponsored products and programs, like you get 3 entries into a drawing for a new electric scooter or whatever it is, like people get incentivized for that.
Yeah,
Gamify.
yeah.
Gamify.
In terms of the educational component, that's definitely something that the subcommittee wanted to focus on is how, how can we get this information out once it is adopted, and how can we explain what these different technologies and opportunities are? So we have discussed that, but I have already started pulling together some, educational type information, but that.
Well, that's, and that, when this plan comes through, it's just like Sustainable Manliness has done its responsibility to say, hey, government, now you know where to go. And then what does Sustainable Manliness want to take away from this is how do we then bring the community along with us? And I think that educational piece is going to be essential. And it's like, instead of writing another plan next year, that hopefully that same energy goes into, we had Yeah, we had a working session for heat pumps, we did a EV drive along, whatever it is, I think that was great.
I think it would be really fun to make sure that this is sort of generationally inclusive and in terms of youth. If there was a summary for the page that was aligned with the K through 12, like curriculum on science or whatever, like whatever it is, or maybe pick a year, like 7th grade or 11th grade or whatever, and then ask, maybe it's older, 11th grade, and ask some students from ESM and from FM to do like a TikTok summary, like a quick summary, like a one pager to say, here are the takeaways from the climate action plan, something like
Right, see
that.
if the plan could be talked about during like whenever they take earth science.
Exactly.
You know, your local government, like, I mean, I'm sure that has to be a part of the curriculum and to say, you know, if you're interested in this, the town has a plan that you can pick up right now and start doing it.
Yeah, so we could recruit those students just by having you and maybe Caitlin or somebody from the committee going into the classrooms just to say hi and sharing it. I know they don't have a lot of time, but there might be a way to share it with the science teachers and then recruit those students to do a little. Here's what it is. And honestly, we could recruit young people at Earth Fest too.
Well, and every time that they need the community service hours, I'm sure we
Yeah.
can just say on the website, hey, here's 3 things that happen every year that you can be a part of to get your community service hours.
Totally.
So. We have 1 minute, so any last thoughts from you all that you wanted to make sure that I hear, before I. Take them back to the subcommittee and make the next revisions and, you know, get ready to release the draft to the public.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tremendous amount. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much for your input. It's really helpful and, you know, will make the plan even better. So I appreciate it.
Okay, so
Thank
we will end up our work session and we'll be back at 6:30 for our town board